Hi friends, I'm just here to start a reading vlog. So this week, last week of June 2024, I am going to be reading Sing Like a Fish, How Sound Rules Life Underwater by Amorina Kingdon. And this is a book that was sent to me by the publisher, Crown Publishing, for me to read and talk about, and I want to read it. I'm very interested in this book. I'm very interested in the topic, and this book published on June the 4th. So I really want to read it in the month that it came out. Amorina Kingdon is a science writer, and so she is tackling the topic of how sea creatures use sound to survive and to live and to thrive, and what the impacts of human development, human actions are on their ability to use sound in the way that they need to. So this is a topic that has been touched on in several science books that I've read previously. The one that comes most immediately to mind is Ed Yong's book about animal senses. And it is a topic that I'm very interested in, particularly because marine life, you know how I feel about marine life. So this final week of June, I am going to be reading this book, and I will be talking with you about it in this vlog. So follow along if you're interested in science writing the way I am, and let's find out about this book together. This book seeks to explain why sound is so important to animals underwater, how sound behaves differently in water than in air, why we haven't always listened beneath the waves, what we learn when we do, and what we miss when we don't. I never knew that fish made sound. Cox eagerly informed me that not only do fish make sounds, in some places they chorus, like a forest at dawn or dusk. People say that fish sing like birds, he told me, but strictly speaking, fish evolved millions of years before terrestrial animals, including birds. Birds, Cox stated, sing like fish. Here I am with a check-in on Sing Like a Fish. I have read the introduction and the first couple of chapters of this book, and I'm very much enjoying it. And this does something that I really enjoy in my popular science books, where the author is a journalist, and they take information and basically go around and talk to a bunch of different scientists that are working on disparate things, but in the same general thematic area, and talk to those people and find out about their research, and then describe it in really interesting and engaging ways, and describe the science in a way that people who don't have any experience in that particular topic can learn about. And I think the author is doing that really well. It's kind of reminding me so far of Julie Burwald's writing. Like, she wrote the book about coral reefs. I've read two of her books anyway, and this author's writing is reminding me of that very much. So enjoying that, learning a lot about, how we in the beginning thought that there was no noise under the ocean, or very, very quiet under the water in the ocean. That was all kind of what we got of the old Jacques Cousteau documentaries, was basically that the ocean was silent, and that is certainly not the case. There is a lot of noise, and one of the ways we figured out that, we learned to contradict that bias is that during the Cold War time period, basically, the United States and Russia and everybody were like listening to each other under the water all the time, and doing it in a way where they weren't telling anybody else that they were doing it. And that science has, in the last several decades, been released. It's no longer under security clearance, and a lot of it, at least in the United States, has been released, and then it's available to researchers to use in their research. And then we realize, and in fact, that the ocean is quite a noisy place. Not just human-related noise is happening, the natural noise levels are quite high in the ocean, because everything is making sounds, from the things that you would expect, like volcanoes going off under the water, or plates tectonic plates moving. The fish themselves are making noises, the animals themselves are making noises, but also things like rain on the surface of the water, snow hitting the surface of the water, glaciers calving off pieces of ice, like all of these things are making noise all the time. So you add to the natural ambient noises the human induced noises, and now you've got like a very loud environment, particularly for species that are evolved to hear. I hope you can hear the quotation marks that I'm putting around the word hear. So chapter 2 actually just talked quite a bit about how different larva species that float around or swim weakly in the water column, like there's lots of species of marine creatures that do what they call broadcast spawning. So they release their eggs and sperm into the water column, and if the eggs and sperm find each other, they can fertilize the egg, and then you get a larva, and that floats around. That's the invertebrate way of doing things. And then fish, of course, lay eggs, and those eggs hatch, and then the small fish larvae are swimming around in the water. And there's a lot of science that shows that for coral reef species that are floating around they have this larval water column type life process, that those larvae are returning to their natal reefs by using sound to orient themselves to get back to where they were born. And that was very surprising to learn from fish, which do have ears, or what we think of as ears, but it is also happening with things like corals and other invertebrates who do not have ears, or at least don't have what we consider ears. And so this chapter 2 is starting to delve into other structures on the body that allow species to sense sound, and not hear in the way that humans think of hearing, but basically sense sound. And I think that is quite fascinating and quite interesting. There's also descriptions of how sound moves through environments. So there are some physics around how sound moves and how different structures on different kinds of species perceive that sound. But don't be scared, because I think Kingdon does a nice job of explaining that kind of stuff in a way that makes it accessible. I mean, I am like, my brain immediately wants to like run off screaming when physics is mentioned, but I think that I was able to follow her explanations quite easily, and I think she does a nice job of explaining that kind of stuff. So don't be frightened off by that. So yeah, that's my little check-in, and so far so good. Here I am, ready to report in on Sing Like Fish by Amorina Kingdon. And I have read the next 3 chapters, so that's chapter 3, 4, and 5. I've got some notes down there, so if I look down, that's why. And I wanted to report back on this. This is very, very interesting. Really learning a lot. Chapter 3 was all about how we learn to listen underwater. So, of course, as you might imagine, a lot of that technology was first developed by the military to try to listen to our quote-unquote enemies, particularly in the post-World War II time frame. A lot of the Navy built a lot of these sort of listening stations up and down the coast, and they said that they were for research purposes, so that it wouldn't raise any red flags for why they were doing that. Of course, I don't think that any of the countries that we were trying to listen to probably were fooled by that, but the good part about it was all of the data that they collected when it became declassified did become
information that researchers can use to learn about how sound moves underwater. And when a lot of information did become public, that's when we realized how much sound there really is underwater. So a lot of stuff, as with a lot of technology, a lot of it started out with military applications. The thing that was super interesting for me in that chapter was that fish have the widest variety of sound making apparatus within their bodies of any vertebrate species on Earth, which I did not know. So like all the variety of ways that fish can make sound is described, as some of it is pretty bizarre. Some of it is not things you would think about. So that was pretty cool. Then chapter 4 is about how fish communicate underwater. And there was a bunch in there about how the division of labor between male and female of different species, and how very often with fish, particularly, males are the ones that guard and protect the nests when there's young. And part of the way that the males prove their fitness to potential mates is by a lot of sound that they make, communication, different ways that they make noise, because that indicates like how much, how fit they are, basically their endurance, their strength, all those kinds of things, because sometimes they might have to like drum on their swim bladder for like hours and hours on end, and it just demonstrates how fit they are. So that was interesting. And then chapter 5 details the evolution of echolocation. So that one had a lot about dolphins, because dolphins we've studied so much, again with the military, but also just with researchers, marine researchers, lots of work done with dolphins over the years. So it describes how they use echolocation to not only figure out where they are in the water, but their abilities even stretch so far as for them to be able to tell the thickness of materials that are in front of them. Fascinating stuff. So yeah, lots to learn in this book. Really enjoying my time with it and looking forward to continuing on. To wrap up my vlog, as I have been reading Sing Like a Fish, and I finally finish it. This is How Sound Rules Life Underwater by Amorina Kingdon. And thank you to Crown Publishing for providing me with a copy of this book so that I could talk about it here on the channel. And this book came out June 4th, I believe, the June 3rd or 4th. So it's available now for you to pick up in your bookstores or at your library. And this is an excellent science book. This is all about how sound works underwater, and particularly with marine life. And the author has talked to many different scientists that are doing all kinds of research on sounds underwater, and how marine species make sound and how human activities influence what marine species are doing. The last few chapters, I've been kind of giving you a chapter by chapter summary of what this book talks about. So chapter 6 was about how animals identify themselves through sound, and particularly marine mammals, and things like killer whales and dolphins, who have particular sounds that are individual to themselves and help them tell other
animals in their area, who they are, which is fascinating, and the scientists that are working on identifying how they do that. That was really fascinating. Chapter 7 is all about whale song, which is something that we first started knowing about in the 1950s. It was actually an album produced of whale song at that time. And since then, we've learned an awful lot more about whale song, how it works, the distances that whale song travels, and what maybe whales are doing when they make those kind of vocalizations. We don't know for sure, but there's some theories around that, which were really interesting. And then chapter 8 was about noise and what noise is. And noise is, we need to differentiate between noise and sound. Noise is unwanted sound that interferes with your ability to perceive things that you're trying to hear or trying to understand in the world around you. And if there's noise, such as, when humans do activities like pile driving or seismic testing or sonar or things like that, it interferes with marine animals' ability to perceive the world around them. It may make them unable to hear predators. It may make them unable to find prey. It may make them unable to do things like reproduce. So there could be an awful lot of impact from that type of unwanted noise. And then chapter 9 is all about shipping, which was a really fascinating chapter. So much of our goods move around the world these days on big container ships. And of course, there's cruise ships, and there's oil exploration ships, and there's, military ships. There's all kinds of shipping happening, more shipping than ever before in human history, and what that does to the marine animals and their ability to do their own activities because of the kind of noise that we're putting into the environment. Particularly for me, what I do with my own work and my own career, was a lot of information in there that was very helpful to me in terms of understanding the big picture. When you're talking about coastal development, things like, building piers and wharfs into the ocean, or wind farms, a lot of talk about developing offshore wind farms, what that impacts of those are going to be on the marine environment. And then chapter 10 is how to quiet an ocean, and it's sort of a wrap-up chapter, and it talks about things like what we do as humans in terms of managing our activities matters. So where we put shipping lanes, where we determine what kinds of activities we're going to do matters, how many marine sanctuaries there are, and understanding the impacts of the global warming, what that's going to do to noise in the ocean. Because as new shipping passages open up, say in the Arctic, what's that going to do to species who are unused to dealing with human activities? Animals that live in the far north, they don't see the kind of shipping activity that animals that live, say, around the North Atlantic here. And cataloging the sounds that marine species make and trying to identify individual species and having some kind of baseline of what's actually in existence at this point, so that we can understand the changes that are happening, how important that is. So lots of super interesting information. This is a very science-y book, and it's, I think the author does a great job of explaining the technology and the science behind different things that she's talking about, but it leans more towards the science side versus, like a pop culture type of a book. But I found it really interesting, super helpful to me as I try to understand what's happening in the marine environment, and lots of information about species that I didn't know about. I always love cool animal facts. If you love cool animal facts, this is a book for you. And yeah, I was really impressed with this one. Thought it was a great book. So please do pick it up if this is a topic that interests you. I think you will find it quite fascinating. Thank you again to Crown Publishing for providing me with a copy of this book. And I hope you are all finding some great books to read, and I will talk to you later.